So, the Virginia plan is the plan that is going to end up being more successful. They're going to base the Constitution off of the Virginia plan pretty much. They're going to decide that that they should base their representatives off of how much your population is. Okay, so then they get into another conversation. They say, okay, so if we're going to base it off of population, so where are the cities with the biggest population? What do these cities have in common? Like New York City and Boston and Philadelphia.
They have a lot of people.
Okay, a lot of people. They might have ports. Where are they located geographically?
Up top.
Northwest.
North, right? Yes, northeast.
Oh.
Okay, they're located north. So our states such as Georgia and like the Carolinas are located in the south, right? And what do we know about the economy in the south? How do they make money down south?
Cotton, tobacco.
What are those examples of?
Economy.
No, what are those examples of? You said it correctly. Good, crops, right? They're crops. And so we know that the South is driven by crops, and who runs those crops and works those fields?
Slaves.
Slaves, right? So in order to get more representation, what do you think the South is going to want to count towards their population?
Slaves.
Slaves, right? Okay, a lot of northern states, they don't have slaves. So their population is just free people. But in the South, they have slaves. So the South is saying, okay, so if we're going to go based off of population, you guys have all these big cities. You have New York, and you have Boston, and you have Philadelphia, and we don't have big cities like that. So in order to get an equal amount of representation, in order to get more representatives, we think our slaves should count towards the population of our representation. Okay? And that's what the South wanted. So from these two plans, we're going to get some compromises. So I'm going to read up here on the board from the reading we had today. It says, Virginia plan, James Madison proposed the Virginia plan, which called for a bicameral or two-house legislature with members based on each state's population. So again, your representation is based on your population. That's how many representatives you get in the two houses. Those two houses are going to be what? Who can tell me what those two houses are? Two different houses. What? Yes, mine. One starts with house.
House of.
Yes.
Burgesses.
Not Burgesses. Good, awesome. House of Representatives. Okay, and the other one is the Senate. Okay, so your two houses are your House of Representatives and your Senate. And so for that, this is the compromise. Small states, they wanted. What did the small states want again? How many votes?
One per.
One vote per. Right. So we have two different houses, House of Representatives, and we have the Senate. And so the compromise that they are going to come to from the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan is that they said, how about this? So how about in the House of Representatives, that's one of the houses, right? What's the other house?
No, the Senate.
The Senate. Okay, they say, how about in the House of Representatives, the number of representatives you get is going to be based off of your population. Okay, so that's like who won it? What plan? The Virginia plan, right? The Virginia plan wanted it to be based off population. So they're saying, all right, Virginia, we'll give you the House of Representatives based on your plan. So it's based off of population. The Senate, instead of based off population, every state is going to get 2 senators. Okay, so the Senate is going to be equal. Every state, no matter how big or how small, has the same amount of representatives. Yes. Awesome.
What plan was first?
Do what?
What plan was brought up first?
I think the Virginia plan. Okay, and so that was called the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise was that they were going to take a little bit from both plans. What they were going to take from the Virginia plan was they were going to divide the House of Representatives up by population. And what did they take from the New Jersey plan, Bryson? What did they do with the Senate? What did they do with the Senate? Yeah.
Each one had 2.
Each one had 2, so it was what?
Equal.
Equal, right? Good. Braden. Okay. So that was the Great Compromise. Now we have another compromise. I was up here. This other compromise is called the 3/5 Compromise. Okay, and the 3/5 Compromise goes like this. It says the Great Compromise settled one major issue, but led to a conflict over another. Southern delegates, whose states had large number of slaves, wanted slaves included in the population count that determined the number of representatives in the House. Northern delegates, whose states had few slaves, disagreed. Not counting the slaves would give the northern states more representatives than the southern states in the House of Representatives. The delegates eventually agreed to the 3/5 Compromise, which called for 3/5 of a state's slaves to be counted as part of the population. So, again, the northern states, as far as slaves, they said no, slaves should not count towards your members of representation. That shouldn't count. And the South, what did they say?
No.
They should.
They said they should, right? They're like, yes, they should. They should count towards our number of representatives. So what was the compromise?
3/5 of the slaves would be counted.
Very good. They were only going to count 3/5 of the slave population. So it wouldn't count all of the slaves, just 3/5. And so here's it kind of broken down in a chart. It says the southern states, they wanted slaves counted as a population to determine the number of representation in the House of Representatives, and opposed counting slaves for the purpose of determining taxation. So they're like saying, you should count our slaves for us when we are wanting to vote, but don't count the slaves when you're telling us how much we have to pay our taxes. Like, they base their taxes off of how many people are in your household or whatever. They're like, count our slaves for how many people are in our house for our representation, but when it comes time to pay taxes, our slaves shouldn't count for how many people are in our house that we should be taxed for.
That's stupid.
Right, that was their argument. In the northern states, they said they were opposed to counting slaves as population to determine representation, and they favored counting slaves for the purpose of determining taxes. So they were saying your slaves shouldn't count. It was the exact opposite. Your slaves shouldn't count towards your representation, but they should count towards your taxes. Okay, and then the 3/5 Compromise said that 3/5 of the slaves were going to count in determining your representation, and 3/5 of the slaves would be counted during your taxes. When they went to determine your taxes, they also used the 3/5 Compromise to go towards that as well. Okay, so for the rest of class, we're going to take a look at a worksheet called the 3/5 Compromise worksheet, where you're going to get
Can I ask a
the
question?
I got a question.
Yeah.
Coach Bolton might have a question.
my
Was
question.
this after or before women could vote?
Was it after or before women could vote? Is that what you said?
Mhm.
This is before women could
So
vote.
only men that were slaves could.
Only men that were free could vote. So slaves didn't even they didn't get to vote. They got to be counted towards the number of representatives. So, like, if you were saying, Georgia, so this is what we're going to look at. So, these are all of your states, your 13 colonies right here. And it shows how much population that they had of free people. This Virginia had 110,000 free people. And then they had this many slaves, 292,000 slaves. So, this number of slaves would count 3/5 of this number towards their total population for their number of representatives. So, yes, Braden.
So it's like when we get a calculator, put the slave population in, and then divide it by 3/5.
Yeah, so we're going to do a little math and history today. And so I'm going to show you, there's 3 different formulas that you guys are going to have to do. So we have the Northern States Plan, the Southern States Plan, and then the 3/5 Compromise. So under the Northern States, what did the Northern States want?
Bigger slaves
So
that
much
come
just-
as
The Northern States, what did they want as far as slaves?
They
No.
wanted
They wanted you to be,
They wanted
they
it to
wanted no
serve.
representation, but they did want you to be taxed.
Good. So they said that your slave shouldn't count towards your representation, right?
And so the Southern, they wanted the complete opposite. They wanted no
They didn't
taxation.
want that.
They didn't want to be taxed for them,
Took a long
but they did
time.
want them to be represented.
Very good.
For them.
Exactly right, Christian. So in the northern states, their plan was slaves should not count towards your population of representatives. So I put the formula. So see how it's in red for northern states?
Yeah, I get
So in order to calculate this one, I put the formula also in red. So you'll take the free population. So in order to do Virginia, we'll take the free population of Virginia, this number right here, 110,900, and then minus the slave population. Okay, so they want to just take the slave population out. So we're not counting the slave population, and then it says divided by 30,000 because you get one representative per 30,000 citizens. Does that make sense?
Like, Coach Bolton.
Uh-huh.
But, cause it says the free population, and then it says the slave population. Why would we have to minus the slave population?
Yeah,
If that's only talking about the.
Yeah, you're right. It's just the free population. I'll fix that right now. I realize the same thing. Okay, but the other formula should be correct.
And so, like, the southern, we'd add both of them up and then divide.
For the southern, you would take the for the southern they wanted both populations to count, your free and your slave population to count. So you would take the free population, add it with the slave population, divide it by 30,000. That's how many representatives you would get. And then for the 3/5 compromise, you take the free population, add 3/5 of the slave population, and then divide by 30,000. Okay, does that make sense? Okay, go ahead and get a Chromebook. You guys can. Everyone needs a Chromebook to do it, but you guys can work in partners.
Thank you.
We need a Chromebook to do it. They just do like most of the time. So. Do it, okay, fine.
Well,
Can I get a Chromebook?
and no one